Thomas Alva Edison exerted a tremendous influence on modern life, contributing inventions such as the incandescent light bulb, the phonograph, and the motion picture camera, as well as improving the telegraph and telephone. His rise from the poor, uneducated railroad worker to one of the most famous men in the world made him a folk hero. Edison was born on 11 February 1847 in Milan, Ohio. He was the youngest of seven children of Samuel and Nancy Edison. His father was an exiled political activist from Canada, while his mother was an accomplished school teacher. In 1854, Edison's family moved to Michigan, where he attended public school for a total of 12 weeks. Edison was a poor student. When his schoolmaster called Edison adult, his mother took him out of the school and proceeded him to teach at home. Around the age of 12, Edison lost almost all his hearing. There are several theories as to what caused his hearing loss. Some attribute it to the after effects of the scarlet fever which he had as a child. He was completely deaf in one ear and barely hearing in the other. He did not let his disability discourage him and often treated it as an asset since it made it easier for him to concentrate on his experiments and research. At the age of 12, Edison took a job selling newspapers and candy on the Grand Trunk Railroad to Detroit. In the baggage car, he set up a laboratory for his chemistry experiments and a printing press, where he started the Grand Trunk Herald, the first newspaper published on a train. The up-to-date articles were a hit with the passengers. This was the first of his entrepreneurial ventures. Edison also used his access to the railroad to conduct chemical experiments in a small laboratory he set up in a train baggage car. During one of his experiments, a chemical fire started and the car caught fire. This forced him to stop his experiments on board. While Edison worked for the railroad, Edison saved a 3-year-old from being run over by a train. The child's grateful father rewarded him by teaching him to operate a telegraph. By age 15, he had learned enough to be employed as a telegraph operator. Then he moved to Kentucky to work for the Associated Press. The night shift allowed him to spend most of his time reading and experimenting. Edison executed his first patent for his electrographic vote recorder on October 13, 1868, which he made in his spare time. The electrographic vote recorder was made for legislators in Congress to vote on issues by switching a device to read either yes or no rather than handwriting each vote. Politicians quickly rejected the device out of fear it would disrupt the voting process. And Edison vowed to never again invent something that didn't have an apparent market. Quadruplex telegraph. Initially, Edison excelled at his telegraph job because early Morse code was inscribed on a piece of paper, so Edison's partial deafness was no handicap. However, as the technology advanced, receivers were increasingly equipped with a sounding key, enabled telegraphers to read message by the sound of the clicks. This left Edison disadvantaged with fewer and fewer opportunities for employment. In 1872, after Western Union adopted duplex for sending two messages in opposite directions, company president hired Edison to invent and patent other methods. While working on duplex telegraphs, Edison realized that he could send four messages simultaneously by combining duplex with a diplex for sending two messages in the same direction. In one such instance, Edison devised the quadruplex telegraph capable of transmitting two signals in two different directions on the same wire. The quadruplex telegraph was Edison's big financial success, and with the funds he set up Menlo Park, which became the first institution set up with the specific purpose of producing constant technological innovation and improvement. Carbon telephone transmitter. In 1876, Edison began work to improve the microphone for telephones, at that time called the transmitter. Up to that point, microphones developed by Alexander Graham Bell worked by generating a weak current. In 1877, Edison developed the carbon transmitter, a device that improved the audibility of the telephone by making it possible to transmit voices at higher volume with more clarity. The carbon microphone works by modulating a direct current and subsequently using a transformer to transfer the signal so generated to the telephone line. Edison's experiments with the telephone and telegraph lead to his invention of the phonograph in 1877. While developing his telephone transmitter, Edison got the idea of creating a machine that could record and play back telephone messages. It occurred to him that sound could be recorded as indentations on a rapidly moving piece of paper. That notion led him to imagine being able to record not just voices but music and other sounds by using sound to vibrate a diaphragm and push a stylus that made indentations on a cylinder covered with wax paper that was being turned by a crank. The machine had two needles, one for recording and one for playback, and when he spoke to the mouthpiece, the vibrations of his voice would prompt the recording needle to indent the cylinder and retain the audio. The first words ever recorded into this machine were the lyrics to Mabel Had a Little Lamb. The phonograph brought him worldwide fame, especially when the device was used by the US Army to bring music to the troops overseas during World War. Edison bought Woodward and Evans' patent of making improvement in design of the Humphrey Davy's invention of the first early electric arc lamp. These early bulbs had extremely short life and required high electric current to operate. In his first attempts to solve these problems, Edison tried using a filament made of cardboard carbonized and with compressed lamp black. This burnt out too quickly to provide lasting light. He made a breakthrough in 1880 and hit on carbonized bamboo as a viable alternative for the expensive platinum filament. A filament of carbonized thread proved to be the key to a long-lasting light bulb. Lamps were put in laboratory and many journeyed out to Menlo Park to see the new discovery. A special public exhibition at the lab was given for a multitude of amazed visitors on New Year's Eve. Edison was looking for rechargeable battery that could use to power their phonographs, but saw other uses for an improved battery, including electric automobiles. In contrast to the widely used lead-acid battery, which was too heavy and tended to leak acid, which corroded the car's interiors, Edison developed a nickel alkaline battery that was much more durable and far less hazardous than the lead-acid battery. Edison also designed a battery for the self-started on a Model T for the Henry Ford in 1912. The system was used extensively in the auto industry for decades. After hundreds of people died in coal mining accidents throughout the early 1900s, the Mine Safety Appliance Company recruited Edison to help fix the problem. He began working on the first electric cap lamp for miners using rechargeable battery packs in 1914. The Edison cap lamp included a battery inside of a steel locking case that miners could wear around, which would retain power for 12 hours. In 1877, Edison patented the electric pen, which allowed workers to make copies of handwritten documents much quicker. The pen was powered by a small electric motor, and as the user would write, the handheld needle punched tiny holes onto the surface of paper. The idea here was to create a stencil by allowing workers to roll ink over the holes and produce copies onto blank sheets of paper underneath. Edison formed the Edison Portland Cement Company in 1899. He tried to promote widespread use of cement for the construction of low-cost homes and envisioned alternative uses for concrete in the manufacture. Unfortunately, Edison was ahead of his time with these ideas as widespread use of concrete proved economically unfeasible at that time. Inspired by his own phonography, Edison created a smaller version of the device and placed it inside imported dolls from Germany. But this failed as children scared of these at that time. Edison said that he is going to design an instrument that does for the eye what the phonograph does for the ear. Edison's first design involved photographing a series of pictures on a cylinder that would then be viewed through a microscope as they turned. In addition, he planned to create sound movies by linking this device with a phonograph. While Edison provided the resources, the vision for the invention and the electromechanical knowledge used in designing motion picture devices, photographer Dixon provided most of the knowledge of photography that those inventions drew on. By 1892, Edison and Dixon invented a motion picture camera and a peephole viewing device called the kinetoscope. They were first shown publicly in 1893, and the following year, the first Edison's films were exhibited commercially. Films were made in the Black Maria, a tar paper shack studio at Edison's West Orange laboratory. Due to his contributions, Edison is often called as the father of motion pictures. After the success of Edison's lighting system, Edison became embroiled in a long-standing rivalry with Nikola Tesla, who worked in Edison's company. The two parted ways in 1885 and would publicly clash over the war of currents about the use of direct current electricity, which Edison favored, versus alternating currents, which Tesla championed. Tesla then entered into a partnership with George Westinghouse, an Edison competitor, resulting in a major business feud over electrical power, leading to battle between the proponents of DC current led by Edison and AC current led by George Westinghouse. Both sides attacked the limitations of each system. One of the unusual and cruel methods Edison used to convince people of the dangers of alternating current was through public demonstrations where animals were electrocuted. One of the most infamous of these shows was the 1903 electrocution of a circus elephant named Topsy on New York's Coney Island. Edison is credited with designing and producing the first commercially available fluoroscope, a machine that uses X-rays to take radiographs. Edison discovered that calcium tungstate fluoroscopy screens produced brighter images than the existing barium platinocyanide screens. The fundamental design of Edison's fluoroscope is still using today. Tachymeter can measure infrared radiation. It was actually invented to measure the heat from solar corona during the total solar eclipse of July 29, 1878. In 1881, Edison filed a patent for preserving fruits and other organic materials by keeping them sealed in a tight air glass vessel that sounds like modern day Tupperware. Edison's last breath was captured in a test tube using similar technology, and it's on display at the Henry Ford Museum. Edison died on October 18, 1931, from complications of diabetes in his home in New Jersey. He was 84 years old. Many communities and corporations throughout the world dimmed their lights or briefly turned off their electrical power to commemorate his passing.